think there is to understand that there is a context in which all these things take place. So in Scandinavia, what we have is we have a long tradition of technology-based businesses. Now the countries in Scandinavia have taken different paths to innovation. So whereas you look in Finland, for example, you have very dramatic innovations based on technology. In Sweden, you have process-driven innovation around all the multinationals that we have there to add more value in the area. In Norway, you have innovation related to the raw material industry, basically petroleum and so on. And in Denmark, you have a different way of taking innovation forward as well around food and social areas. So they are all different. I think that what they have in common is that they have a very heavy participation of innovation as a foundation for firms' ability to do well. In other words, it's natural for firms to invest a lot in R&D and other types of innovation. And if you look at the ranking list, it's made up of normally things like proportion of R&D spending in GDP and so on. And what is important to remember is if you look at the government spending, there's no difference more or less between Australia and Scandinavia. It's the private industry spending, right? So private industry stands for 80% of the number that's normally around 4% of GDP. So that's the first one. We have a tradition of doing these things. The second one is we have a high emphasis of education in the technical and biological sciences, in other words, natural sciences. So we have a lot of engineers.
It's all adding up.
Yeah, that's right. We have a lot of engineers, and our industries are engineering based. Yeah. And thirdly, we are all quite well aware of the fact that our ability to have a good lifestyle, infrastructure, healthcare, good pensions and stuff like that, are related to our ability to sell things to other countries, which we have a large margin and high value added in. So we tend not to sell a lot of raw materials, a substantially lower proportion than Australia does. And in addition, we come from a cold climate where cooperation is more natural than here, where you can have a great time all on your own. I mean, what we have is a long tradition of specializing in controlling large value chains. So if you look, for example, at the mining industry, which is a classical one in Australia, where you have large players here. Sweden is the largest mining country in Europe. But what we have that you do not have is very large players who are the suppliers of this industry. We have the Sandviks, we have the Atlas Copcos, and in Finland you have the Outotec's, you have the Metsos, and these people are the ones who get most money from the mining companies around the world. You don't have those. In other words, you haven't been very good traditionally of building these issues. There have been no real interest in adding value. Now you have a growing and quite successful mining equipment and services industry, but still the Australian part of that, as opposed to the part made up by foreign companies being here, is still relatively small in this area. Now, if you look at other industries, be it agriculture, again you tend to do commodity export. To a great extent, and that's all right if you have a low-cost base, but you no longer have a low-cost base, and that means that that's a difficult play to have. Now, I'll give you an example. What is value adding in the milk-based industry here? Well, it's removing the water of the milk and selling skim milk powder, right? Whereas, I can talk about a Finnish dairy who sells IP to 120 countries and hence makes substantially more money per liter of milk than the dairy here. I go up and I look at the industries who have grapes, and what do? They remove the water and sell it as raisins, rather than packaging it into luxury foods that fits an Asian palate and charge huge amounts of money for it. So there's some fundamental attitudinal issues around commodities versus value-added products. Australia has a lot of advantages. You also have a really strong world-class research system in Australia. Huge number of universities that are very, very good at research. But what you are missing is the connection between that capability inside the universities and industry. There's very little leakage of the R&D results into industrial value creation in Australia. And again, that's something. If you do rankings, there's a very good ranking system that's called Leiden rankings, and they look at universities. And if you look at impact in the academic community, the top Australian university is number 100, which is very good. It's Melbourne University in this case. And if you then look at, and there are very few German and Scandinavian universities, if any, ahead of it. Right? Whereas if you look at cooperation with industry, 2 out of the top 5 are Swedish, and the top Australian is around 250, and it's University of Tasmania. So there is a completely different balance in how universities here relate to its environment. This is an environment for academic activities, whereas in the Germanic belt we have academic industry activities. One of them has to do with the different roles that are played by multinationals and governments as drivers of innovation. In other words, in Scandinavia there's a high demand structure created for innovation by global supply chains and by government asking for things that don't exist. In Australia, those two things tend to be absent. Firstly, you do not have very many large global supply chains in Australia, and the companies you have tend to be more cost focused than value focused. And secondly, government here tends not to be a good user of its money to drive innovation. For example, it doesn't procure things that don't exist. It tends to prefer off-the-shelf proven solutions at low cost, neither of which is enhancing innovation. So there is some fundamental things that can be tweaked. So it's not all about culture, it's also about the tools you deploy.